Welcome to The Insider by DFIN. I'm Dana Barrett, and joining me right now is Justin Nowicki. He is the Director of Business Intelligence for the Venue product at DFIN. Welcome, first of all.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate you being here. And we're here to talk about the bedroom versus the bullpen. I love that title for a podcast episode. So I'm going to get into that. And this is all as it relates to mergers and acquisitions, of course. But before we actually get into what that means, share a little bit with me about your background.
Sure. So I started my career as an investment banker right out of undergrad and spent a couple years in the industry before transitioning into technology. But this first couple years were really, it felt more like a decade of experience given the rigors and long hours of investment banking work.
That would be the bullpen.
The bullpen, absolutely.
Of our title.
Back then, that was a bullpen. You
Yes.
had all of the junior bankers.
Right.
For us, it was about 12, 15 of us in Cube City, in an office downtown together.
Yeah.
And it was kind of a breakfast, lunch, and dinner kind of place. You were there almost every day. You ate most of your meals there, and these became your best friends.
Yeah. And you were expected to be there as many hours as necessary.
Absolutely. I mean, it was the kind of culture where if you took a bathroom break that was a bit too long, someone might send you an email and ask where you were.
Wow. Okay. And you did this for how many years?
I was in a bullpen for about 4 years. And then actually, when I started working in tech, I still did a few deals, but I started to do them from home because I was working with remote teams.
Interesting.
So I was a little earlier to the banking from the bedroom than maybe some of my colleagues.
The bedroom portion of our topic,
Yes.
So bedroom versus bullpen. So you've experienced both sides of that. Before we get to what it's like to sort of work remotely and that sort of difference, and of course we all know COVID forced everyone to work from their bedrooms for a while, especially in New York where nobody has a basement. So a lot of people around the rest of the country were in basements, but
Yes.
New York bedrooms. So talk to me a little bit more about that bullpen experience and what that life was like.
Well, it's simultaneously kind of horrendous and also really fun and in a way the best years of your life.
Yeah.
In a brutal way, because you're with your colleagues for so many hours, working on tough problems under a lot of stress, but you also conform to like a very unique banker culture. So you find that people start to sound the same, they're using the same words, we're wearing the same clothes. I mean, I'm sure you've heard of like the Manhattan wardrobe where all the bankers are wearing Patagonia vests.
Oh, how funny.
So it really does, you become little carbon copies of one another. And that's kind of fun because you're generally really proud of your work and you're as sharp as you've ever been. So it's a bit of both, but that's kind of a glimpse at the culture.
There's a little bit of the team spirit sort of thing happening.
Absolutely.
Well, and I think if I recall when we were talking about this before, going live with our podcast, you were telling me that there's, a pretty small number of folks that do this work compared to like lawyers as an example.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great comparison because we think of law as a very prestigious career path. And because of that prestige, it doesn't allow that many people to participate. There are very few attorneys out there compared to a big employment base like truck drivers.
Right, sure.
But bankers are even smaller. So there might be about 3 million bar registered attorneys today in the US.
Right.
There are probably closer to maybe 3,000 investment bankers or mergers and acquisitions professionals.
That's a very different scale.
They could fit inside a small, like a high school football stadium.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good image. I like that. So obviously I already mentioned COVID, but talk to me about how the culture changed when COVID hit and the lockdowns came and all of a sudden we were in a very different world.
Yes. Well, I think everyone was, like the rest of the world, concerned about it.
Sure.
But especially the junior bankers in that bullpen. Your first year, you really don't know what's going on. I think it takes about a year to feel comfortable with most of your core day-to-day tasks.
Right.
And when you're in the bullpen, you can just lean over to the guy next to you and say, hey, how do I build this model? Or what is this financial term I just heard about? Or can you review or proofread this deck I just wrote?
Right.
Not to mention that we used to print a lot of materials and present them in hard copy. So you'd spend time in the printing room, printing and binding your pitch deck, going see your client.
I never worked in M&A, but I have a lot of recollections of binding documents, and yeah, that's never fun.
Exactly. So now we're in this forced digital world where you lose the ability to ask your colleagues for help. You have to call them. Also, your boss doesn't know, when you're away from your desk, are you just grabbing coffee? Or where are you?
Right.
So they're calling you, contacting you at all times without knowing, what you're doing or where you might be. And then you also are starting to go from printed documents to a digital world where, how's that next pitch going to go? Are you going to share that deck through a Zoom call with a client? And because it's digital, you no longer have a hard cutoff print date.
Right. You can be making changes up to the last second.
Yeah, I mean, we could be changing slide 16 when you're still on slide 2.
Yeah.
So,
bit
of change.
Some of that was coming along before COVID, right? Some of the shift to, of course, lots of the shift to digital. But I assume for, the bullpen, for mergers and acquisitions, for banking, it didn't have to be all virtual because you were in person. So there was still probably a hybrid, yes?
Yeah, absolutely. And you would see, especially with the bigger, more prestigious transactions, a lot more in-person time spent, because if you're doing something that might impact thousands or tens of thousands of employees and might be a multi-billion-dollar financial transaction,
right,
it's worth it to spend the couple $1,000s to get on a flight, spend time in person. But cost cutting, hits every industry. And if we can do one more deal because we're not flying all over the country, flying all over the world, then there's an incentive for the banks to do that. So they've tried to make the environment more economical, but also more, with maybe higher performance.
Right, interesting. So there's also, of course, there's this whole other aspect, right? You mentioned there only being 3,000 investment bankers doing this kind of work compared to the 3 million lawyers. And then we're in this period of time where there's this great resignation. There's the generation that's coming into the workforce doesn't want to work that way. Not only do they not really want to work in person, they don't want that kind of lifestyle.
Yes.
And even those that might be willing to do it, the rest of their family and friends are like, dude, let's go.
Yeah.
You have to have a life here. So how does all of that sort of play into the advantages that, having some of these digital tools like Venue, like virtual data rooms, how does this sort of work together?
Well, in a way, it's great that the virtual data room was always, virtual. Yeah,
right,
there was a point when these were physical and we had documents in a room.
Right.
So we were one of the few digital tools that bankers would use to collaborate and due diligence. But you would still largely be in an office accessing the virtual data room. So really there's no reason why you couldn't be, I guess, in your bedroom.
Right.
Accessing a data room and doing diligence. And because the nature of this work is very 24/7, you may get some critical files you need to review added to the room at midnight or on Sunday. And you typically want a very quick response because there's a time limit on how much time you have to do diligence.
Right.
So you want to review those files quickly. It's more efficient, in my opinion, and a healthier work-life balance to have the bulk of this industry working from home so that they can get work done when it comes onto their desk.
Right.
But when they have an hour free, they can go really enjoy their time or do laundry or dishes and not have to have the FaceTime of sitting in a bullpen with work to be done.
Right. I mean, everybody loves doing laundry and dishes. Obviously.
It has to get done, right?
It does have to get done. Yes, for sure. But so now you're looking at a couple different things here, right? When you're talking about these virtual data rooms, and we can kind of go down a lot of different paths with this, but because we're talking sort of about this cultural shift and, why it's advantageous to sort of not just sort of partially use a virtual data room, but sort of fully embrace that. Are there aspects of what Venue offers? Because obviously you guys are not the only product out there in the marketplace. So what is it that this Venue product brings to the game that is going to help this now sort of bedroom culture?
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll touch on just the use of video in the deal-making process, where instead of those in-person meetings, you're doing Zoom calls.
Yeah.
And with Zoom, you can record the call.
Yeah.
Where it'd be pretty awkward to put a camera in front of a boardroom when you have that in-person conversation.
Or at someone's desk.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Now you have that.
Yeah.
And that means that we can send that video or share it, in the virtual data room, and we can share it with other people participating in the deal.
Right.
That need access to that knowledge.
Right.
And it's better to hear it from the source than get, a list of notes or an email I sent them after. That's kind of a vague recollection of what I was thinking. But we do charge based on storage. So now if you have a large or a series of large, maybe 4K video files,
right,
what does that do to the performance of the room
right,
and also the cost of the room, and how do we as the vendor react to those new requirements?
So you bring up a really interesting point, because I'm envisioning a conversation on Zoom where we're being, this is like, maybe we're getting ready to IPO, we're talking about, market sensitive information, we're talking about numbers that we don't want shared with the rest of the world.
Absolutely.
So now we need to know that this is secure. When I was in the bullpen and I was talking to you across the desk, or I was talking on the phone to one person, I felt pretty comfortable. But now this is digital. Like, this could, potentially be exposed in some way. So how do the virtual data room products, and Venue in particular, sort of ensure that that's not going to happen, even with a video of a Zoom?
Yeah, it's a great question, and that really is the core of why people choose a product like ours, a virtual data room, than some other means to share files, because there are plenty of file sharing sites that are really inexpensive out there.
Right.
But what a virtual data room gives you, and I think the biggest differentiator, is really granular control over each user. So I could say your permissions to view this file and one other file, but not the rest of the files.
Right.
And maybe I want you to only view it in an online secure viewer, so I can track your time, prevent downloads, prevent screenshots.
So I can't just like pull it up in Chrome.
Exactly.
And take a look.
You can't go, take a screenshot and send it to your friend who could go, insider trade on that IPO or that divestiture or whatever the transaction is.
Right, interesting. So how do you find that the sort of current crop of investment bankers are using this not only using it, but feeling about this technology and feeling about working in the bedroom? Are they missing the camaraderie of the bullpen? And I mean, bringing it back to that culture, like if I'm in my bedroom, there's lots of advantages. I get the laundry done, but I don't have that jump over the wall and, over my cube and say, what does this term mean? Or, so how are they feeling about all of that?
I think still mixed reviews, and we'll see how this pans out. Most firms have adopted some sort of a hybrid policy and been, as they've had the ability or the legal right to go back to an office, they've still maintained some aspect of a work remote culture.
Yeah.
Other firms have been more in office, some have been fully remote, but this younger generation that grew up with a cell phone in their hands, they're texting, they're used to modern, really performant web applications.
Yeah.
They didn't have dial-up internet, so they can actually send large files through the internet and video chat. They are, I think, responding generally well and very in favor of this because the work-life balance is better.
Right, so that gets to that sort of, this is the generation that doesn't want that 24/7 working thing.
Yes.
I mean, I think all of us are sort of forced to work 24/7 now, to your point, because we're holding our little work tool in our hands when we're out having dinner, right? But
that actually brings up a great point, that historically the data room has been kind of a desktop or something you need a laptop to access it.
Yeah.
So now, are people comfortable, are they ready, or do they require us to have something that's more mobile?
Right.
Are they going to be sitting at dinner and saying, hold on, let's pause the conversation, I need to add a file or add access to a file for you?
Right.
You would never have thought that 10 years ago.
Right. But also, like, just thinking about, how do I recruit people to do this work now? How do I make sure my bank has the best investment bankers? And yes, I want them to have some social interaction so that they're learning from each other, and so that they want to keep working when it's hard, right? But also, how do I attract them? And what are you seeing from a trend perspective on that front?
Yeah, well, especially as technology enables us to do more high functioning tasks quickly, a lot of complex math in Excel. It's really hard to do that for 18 hours straight. I mean, most people just aren't capable of that.
Right.
And that's not necessarily a meritable skill set either.
Yeah.
We want well-rounded people in banking that can do finance, but are also well-spoken and can proofread their writing.
Yeah.
So having a better culture by allowing work remote and having the right technology tools to support them, I think is critical in maybe not attracting talent in, but retaining them. Making sure that you get a full 3 years out of an analyst and that they convert to an associate, rather than someone that comes on board, gets trained for 6 months, and then says, you know what, the compensation, it's good, it's higher than my friends make, but I really just don't like the environment.
Yeah, I never get to have any fun.
Yes.
Yeah. Was there any kind of struggle? I'm jumping around a little bit, but it popped into my brain as you were talking. When we went into this COVID mode, and we were saying, look, virtual data rooms already existed.
Yeah.
But were there just banks out there that weren't using this kind of technology enough yet, where they all of a sudden had to scramble so that their people could work from home when things got locked down?
I think in terms of the virtual data room, that has been ubiquitous for maybe almost a whole 15 years now. I think the first virtual data room came out right around 2000, 2001. So that's been a firm part of our process.
Right.
But there certainly were other technologies like Zoom licenses, especially at the beginning. Some banks didn't allow Zoom, some didn't allow Teams.
Right.
Some were still using, WebEx.
Yeah, well, that's why all those stocks went up.
Yeah,
right away
exactly. Right, they went through the roof.
Right.
But especially for us now in a remote sales environment, we used to be hanging out with these people in person. So now you had to have conference calls or Zoom calls.
Yeah.
But not all the banks had licenses or access to all the platforms, and it was a little messy.
Well, and some of it was probably their insecurity about those tools in terms
Yes.
of, everything has to be so locked down when you're a bank, and now you want me to use all these different tools, and I don't know how locked down they are, right?
Exactly, because if there is a leak and you have, a junior analyst that is having a conversation about financials that are not public, but are on a public company, that could be a big issue. And especially if that was on Zoom, there might have been, issues of, was that recorded? Is there a transcript? Was there a typo in the, AI assisted transcript that Zoom creates that got leaked and caused a panic?
Right.
Thankfully, none of these things have happened, but you can see the security teams at these firms being deeply concerned about the access and vulnerabilities.
Yeah. Justin, before I let you go, are there any trends that you see coming down the pike that you are focused on or feel like everyone needs to know about or at least keep their eye on?
Yeah, well, I think certainly the work-life balance and the culture in the banks is going to be really interesting to see over time. And with that and the ability to do deals from anywhere, do we see a big change in Manhattan, the hub of M&A in, I'd say the world, but certainly the United States? Do we see those bankers saying, well, I'll take the compensation and I'll take the hard work hours, but I want to work from the mountains in Colorado, or I want to go work on the beach in California.
Or I just don't want to be in a city when pandemics happen and everyone's so close together.
Maybe they just don't want to pay $4,000 a month for 600 square feet.
That could be. That is fair. It's hard to live in that tiny little space.
Hence the bedroom and not the spare
basement,
office
right?
or the basement.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. All right. Anything else that you see?
I think that's really the primary thing I'm interested in. Of course, there's always technology changes. And I think as the banks adopt more and more, and we have these just new technology every day, I think we'll see a lot of new tools come up and efficiency gains. And I've got some ideas that I probably shouldn't say out loud of
Fair
where
enough.
that might go,
Fair
because DFIN might build some of those tools.
Sure.
But there's certainly a list, and technology will just play a bigger and bigger role in banking, whether or not it's remote or in person.
Yeah, absolutely. Justin, thank you so much. I really appreciate this information. Thinking about how you even talk to investment bankers and the banks about how to provide these services is huge. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks very much. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. This has been The Insider by DFIN. We'll see you next time.